We all like to think we have a pretty solid moral compass, right? That little voice inside that guides us. But what if I told you that guide isn't as fixed as we think? Today, we're going to dive deep into the hidden biases, the little bugs in our mental software, and the cultural scripts that are secretly shaping our most deeply held ethical beliefs. So, I've got a question for you, and I want you to really think about it. Are your ethical beliefs truly your own? Or are they maybe the product of these invisible glitches in your thinking and scripts that were written for you by your culture? This is the big question we're going to unpack. And trust me, the answer might just surprise you. Just look at these two statements. On the one hand, you have this idea that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Makes sense. But on the other hand, you have this powerful belief that individual rights have to be protected, even if it costs the group. Both of these feel right, don't they? And that's exactly why good, smart people can disagree so passionately. They're often starting from totally different, deeply ingrained frameworks that we're about to take apart. So, to really get to the bottom of this, we first have to look at the universal hardware we're all running. Think of it like your brain's operating system. And just like any piece of software, it's got some bugs, some glitches. These are cognitive shortcuts that affect every single one of us, no matter where we're from. So yeah, we're going to start with these universal bugs. They are predictable, systematic patterns that can twist our judgment without us even noticing. And look, this isn't a sign of being weak or flawed. It's just a fundamental part of how the human mind works. It's trying to simplify an incredibly complex world. So what are we actually talking about when we say cognitive bias? Well, the research defines it as a pervasive shortcut in our thinking. It's the brain's way of making things easier. But the catch is, these shortcuts can lead to consistent, predictable mistakes in how we judge things. A classic example, and we all do this, is confirmation bias. This is our brain's natural tendency to hunt for, interpret, and remember information that proves what we already believe. If you think a certain policy is a great idea, you're going to magically notice all the articles that agree with you and just kind of brush past the ones that don't. It feels like you're being totally logical, but a lot of the time, you're just digging yourself deeper into what you already thought. But hey, it's not all just about cold, hard logic, is it? Our emotions have their own predictable glitches too. These are called affective biases, and they systematically pull our moral compass in all sorts of directions. Let's look at two really powerful ones. First up, loss aversion. Get this, psychologists have found that the pain of losing something feels about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the exact same thing. So losing 20 bucks stings way, way more than finding 20 bucks feels good. This can make us kind of irrationally cautious. We cling to what we have, whether it's an object, an idea, or an argument, because the thought of losing it is just too painful. And then you've got the identifiability bias. Isn't it wild how a news story about one single child trapped in a well can capture the entire world's attention, but a statistic about thousands of people dying from a preventable disease barely makes a ripple? Our empathy is just wired to respond to a specific person with a face and a name, not a faceless number. And this powerfully skews our moral priorities toward individual stories and away from huge abstract problems. Okay, so we've got these universal glitches hardwired into our brains and our emotions, but that's only half the story. On top of that hardware, we all have unique software installed by our upbringing, our society. These are socially scripted lenses. And researchers have a perfect way of describing these. Cultural biases are basically the unconscious filters we use to see the world. They shape our entire understanding of what's right, what's wrong, and what's just normal. And they do it without us even realizing it. They're basically handing us the script for the moral plays of our lives. Let's look at one of the biggest cultural lenses out there, the spectrum from individualism to collectivism. So individualistic cultures, they tend to put a huge emphasis on personal freedom and achievement. The self is seen as independent. On the flip side, collectivist cultures are all about group harmony and loyalty. The self is interdependent. You're defined by your relationships and duties to the group. Now, neither one is better than the other, but they lead to very different ideas about what's ethical. So here's where it all comes together. This is the crucial part. What happens when our universal brain bugs crash into our specific cultural lenses? Well, that's the moment moral biases are born. It's when our internal wiring and our external programming combine to build what feel like perfectly logical, totally compelling arguments. And that brings us to this key idea of a moral bias. See, unlike a simple cognitive mistake, a moral bias isn't random. It's a tendency that, as the researchers say, unwittingly influences our moral judgment in specific directions. It's our brain's universal glitches being steered by our cultural programming to push us toward a particular ethical conclusion. Let's make this real with a couple of examples. First, their standpoint adherence. This is basically what happens when confirmation bias gets supercharged by your identity. You don't just prefer evidence that supports you. You dig in your heels and refuse to change your mind, even when the facts are staring you in the face. Then there's expectation bias, where we just so happen to find the moral outcomes we expected to find all along, almost like we're fulfilling a prophecy that our culture wrote for us. And this stuff can get really sneaky. Bias can even infect the very tools we think we're using to be logical. On the left here, you see theory dominance. That's when someone gets so attached to one single framework, like always focusing on the greatest good for the greatest number, that they completely ignore other important things like fairness or justice. And on the right, you have conceptual bias, which is about hidden assumptions baked right into our language. For instance, just framing a debate as pro-life versus pro-choice already embeds a bias in the words themselves, and that can steer your judgment before the argument even starts. Okay, so check this out. This slide is like the whole assembly line, from hidden bias to a bad argument. It all starts with a universal cognitive glitch, something like confirmation bias. Then, it gets filtered through a cultural lens, maybe individualism, which really values sticking to your guns. That combo creates a moral bias, like standpoint adherence. And finally, to defend that position, you might use a flawed argument, a fallacy, like cherry-picking only the data that supports you. And just like that, in 4 steps, a hidden psychological quirk has turned into a flawed but very confident public argument. So I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds a little bleak, doesn't it? Are we all just puppets of our own psychology and culture? Well, not exactly. The thing is, we can't completely eliminate bias. It's just part of being human. But what we absolutely can do is learn to manage it. This means we need to shift our whole goal. Trying to be perfectly unbiased is impossible. It's a lost cause. The real achievable goal is to become bias aware. Seriously, just acknowledging that these forces are at play is the first and most powerful step you can take toward making clearer, more thoughtful decisions. And here are 3 actual, concrete strategies you can use to do just that. First, practice reflexivity. Get in the habit of examining your own beliefs and asking, wait, why do I feel so strongly about this? Second, actively seek out different perspectives. Don't just surround yourself with people who agree with you. Intentionally find smart people who disagree and really try to understand where they're coming from. And finally, foster open communication. Help create spaces where it's safe to talk about potential biases and challenge each other's assumptions without it turning into a fight. So, I'll leave you with this question. The next time you're in a heated debate, or you're just listening to someone make a passionate moral argument, try to tune your ear to a new frequency. Don't just listen for the logic and the facts. Listen for the subtle hum of the underlying biases, those universal glitches and cultural scripts that might be doing the real heavy lifting. What you hear just might change how you see everything.